Yo, what's up everyone? Mike here, hanging out on the mushroom farm. Great video for you guys. So I've got some blue oyster mushrooms right here, and I've also got some king trumpets, okay? These are Pleurotus syringae. Check out the stems on those things, boy. These are a really good mushroom. One of my favorites to cultivate, and I'm gonna talk about some of the differences in cultivating the king oyster mushroom or the Pleurotus syringae, and I'm going to talk about the blue oyster here, some of the differences between these two today. I'll talk about some of the different culinary aspects of these mushrooms too and how you might use them, but check it out. You guys kind of see obviously the structural differences already between them. I got this one right here. This is doing a side fruit. This is the blue oyster. And then these king trumpets, I did a nice little top fruit. You see how the mushrooms are coming out of the top of the block? We'll talk about that a little bit. I am just amazed how nice these are. Okay, so first let's talk about the similarities between these two mushrooms right here, okay? So first of all, they're both oyster mushrooms. They're both within the genus Pleurotus, and these are both gourmet mushrooms. As far as substrate, what kind of substrate are we cultivating this on? Master's mix. So I choose to cultivate the blue oyster and the king oyster both on master's mix. As far as the growing conditions, I'm actually growing both of these mushrooms in the same grow room, okay? So far we have a lot of similarities. Now, there are some key differences though, obviously, between these king oysters and the blue oyster. These are both heavy yielding mushrooms. The blue oyster, these you can expect to get anywhere from 2.5 to up to 4 pounds on one of these 10 to 12 pound substrate blocks. So this is a highly efficient mushroom, really great decomposer. Biological efficiency on oyster mushrooms is very high. As far as the king, the Pleurotus syringae, another super high yielder. This is for sure going to be over 2 pounds of kings. So we'll weigh this. I'll see exactly like how much this is, but this is definitely going to be over 2 pounds of kings. Although it doesn't look like, if we put it right next to these other oysters, these ones just look giant, you know, but it's just because they kind of have that like fanned out shape. The king trumpet, these things, as you can tell, look at that stem. It's just super dense, okay? So both of them high yielders. Now, I want to kind of talk about the structural differences a little bit. Now, this blue oyster, okay, so look at how these caps are, okay? See how it's kind of flexible? Super flexible, actually, like very flexible. And they tear kind of easily, too. The king, not like that. So these kings, look at this. Look, you can almost hear it. Can you guys hear that? I got a king drum. King and bass, dude. So these caps on the king oyster are definitely not like the Pleurotus austratus, the blue oyster. These are a lot more firm. You're not going to see that cap flex on these king oysters like you do that blue, okay? So these are very dense, just really kind of nice and firm mushrooms. The texture is phenomenal. Out of all of the gourmet mushrooms I grow, these probably have like the firmest texture. So anyway, nice solid mushroom as far as the cap goes. The stem, okay? I'll just say the stem on the king trumpet is a lot of the main reason why people decide to eat and choose to eat the king trumpet. Look how big and firm these are. They make really good like imitation or vegan scallops because that mushroom has a really good scallop flavor. Now, the blue oyster, these stems, you guys can kind of see the stem there a little bit. It's not as existent as the king, and it's just because it's a totally different mushroom. People usually eat the blues for like the cap, okay, and the stem on the blue is actually a little bit chewier. I will say, this blue specifically though, so this strain of blue oyster mushroom, I call this king blue. It is not the same king blue that Mossy Creek has available. I just want to let everyone know that this is kind of like my own king blue. It's a phenotype that I took from spore from a strain from Aloha Medicinals. I've been growing this specific strain of blue oysters for almost 8 years now. It's highly prolific. Now, one thing about this blue oyster mushroom specifically though, typically oyster mushrooms have really chewy stems. This King Blue Oyster does not have chewy stems. It's kind of marshmallowy, so they're nice and edible. It's not going to be chewy like you would have on like maybe like a pearl oyster or an elm oyster or something like that. These actually have really good stems, but still not to the extent that the Pleurotus syringae has. The Pleurotus syringae and king oyster stem is like totally in a class of its own, and it almost can't be compared to any other oyster mushrooms. That stem is one in itself. As far as flavors on the blue oyster, those blue oysters are going to give you that like savory umami flavor. I like to fry my blue oysters, actually. I like to just kind of like put a nice thin tempura breading on them, and sometimes I'll even toss them in buffalo sauce. Check this out. I actually tossed some of these in buffalo sauce recently after I fried them, and put a little ranch dressing in a petri dish. I thought that was cool. So I made that recently, though. It was a fun little kind of like appetizer dish. Cool thing to do with the blues. Like I was saying, one thing I'm really looking forward to doing with these king oysters here, or these king trumpets, is scallops. So I'll probably show a tutorial or a little example of how you can make vegan scallops with these, because that's one of the main reasons why people like to grow these. Just because it's got that great scallop flavor, and just the stems, you can kind of cut yourself nice little scallop discs. Works out really good. Now I want to talk about like the cultivation aspect of these things a little bit too. Let's talk about the blue oysters, and let's talk about the king trumpet. So if we're going to rate these right now, so the blue oyster, this one, it's a super beginner mushroom, okay? So any beginner can start with the blue oyster. That is one of the first mushrooms I started cultivating. It's just highly reliable, super high yielder. You almost can't mess it up. It's really good as far as even battling contamination. Like if your grow block gets contaminated, the blue oyster will just almost eat it right up. You can see how dense that mycelium is. Like look how thick and how white that is. That being said, always work as clean as you can, try to avoid contaminants, but I will say the blue is pretty resilient, okay? It takes about 2 weeks for the blue oyster to colonize the fruiting block. So it takes about 2 weeks for that mycelium to fully colonize it, and then it's ready to go into the grow room. I kind of put them in the grow room in between that 2 to 3 week period, and then you can side fruit these mushrooms, or you can top fruit them. It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter!
These right here, though, I did a side fruit. Now, I will say it's a little bit different on the king trumpet. King trumpet mushrooms, okay, as opposed to that 2 to 3 week incubation period that we have for the blue, the king is a little bit longer, okay? And I do it a little bit differently. What I kind of do is I just let the king bags incubate, and I actually wait until I start to see pin formation on the top surface of the substrate inside the mushroom bag. And when I see some pin formation, then what I do is I go ahead and I put it in the grow room and I cut the top of the bag off. Kind of like this. This is actually a bag I just took out of my grow room. Look at that, guys. So I wait till I see these little clusters of pins forming on top of the substrate, just like that. And then I cut the top of the bag off. And then I just let her eat, dude. Let them go. Send it. These things are taking off. In just a few days, these will be ready to harvest. So basically, the blue oysters will spend less time in incubation than what the kings will. The kings will definitely eat up a little more of your incubation space and take a little more time in incubation. But as soon as it's ready to put them in the grow room, like I said, just top the bag, stick them in the grow room, and it's only going to take a few days, and those pins will turn into nice, massive king oyster mushrooms. Now, so far, both of these mushrooms sound pretty good, right? So the blue oyster, obviously, we got these nice meaty caps. Kings, kind of like the same consistency and texture throughout, but really awesome stems. Like I said, we got some differences between the incubation time and then kind of like how I like to fruit these mushrooms. There's some nuance between that. I will say, if I was going to rate one harder than the other, I'm definitely going to rate the king trumpet as harder to grow than the blue oyster. Like I said, this is a great beginner mushroom. The king is a little more advanced. I will say, this specific strain I have of king oysters is really good, I'd say, for a beginner, because it's easy, because you can see the pins form in the top of the substrate, and then you just wait till those pins form on the top of the substrate, and like I said, then send it. So if you use that technique, this strain works really good. There's other strains out there that don't perform as well, but what I have found is this strain of king oyster that I have just pins very easily. So I have really good results just waiting for pins to form in the bag, and then, like I said, go ahead and fruit it. Now, one thing you will battle a little bit with the king trumpet is making sure we don't have bacterial blotch in the grow room. So you can see I have these nice, beautiful white stems. You don't see any like yellow patches or anything like that. These are like primo cream of the crop.
The cream of the crop!
King oyster mushrooms, man. But when the temperatures get high sometimes, the king oyster can experience a condition known as bacterial blotch. It could potentially wipe out your whole crop. So I'll just say, they don't like it over 70 really, okay? King trumpets, although some of these other mushrooms, you can get away growing a lot of these other mushrooms above 70, even into the 80s sometimes. The kings will blotch out on you. The king blue, it's less likely to blotch, but it still can blotch. I will say that is one thing you will experience with blue oysters in higher temps. I'd say kind of like beyond 75 degrees. If you could keep it 75 or under, that's really the best for these king blues or these blue oysters. But that's kind of what you'll see there. You'll notice you got to keep things cooler for the king trumpet, but for the blue oyster, you can get away with a little more temperature swings and stuff like that. Okay, so now I'm gonna pick these mushrooms real quick. I'm just gonna rip them off the block. I want to weigh them for you guys just to show you kind of like what they'll weigh out and what you can expect. Got a little sawdust we're gonna clean off the back there. Yup, over 2 pounds, 2 pounds, 4 ounces. It's pretty average, I'd say. Sometimes you can get a little more. You probably could have got just a little more out of that, believe it or not, guys. Okay, so we got those. Gonna set these down. These are just so nice. Look at that. Look at that. Woo! Let's weigh these out and see what we got. All right, you guys want to see how close I was with my 2 pound estimate? Let's see what we got here. So, watch me. No scale tricks. 13 ounces. Yeah. Yeah, we'll take it. Oh, there we go. 1 pound, 3 ounces. We got to add. We can add this on there. What do you guys think? What do you think? Oh, let's go, boys. Let's go. And I want to say, too, if any of you guys are interested in growing the blue oyster mushroom or the king trumpet, just look in the description box below and you can head over to my website and purchase some of my liquid cultures and grow some of these yourself. Well, all right, everyone, so that was kind of the differences between the king trumpet and the blue oyster mushroom. If you guys have any questions for me, just put it down below in that comment section and I will be sure to address it. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful and informative, and if you did, please drop this video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, but that's all I got for you on this one, and I will catch you guys on the next one.